Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on our podcast. We have an election reform organization we're going to interview today, and we haven't interviewed one for a while, so I'm looking forward to it. I love to hear the reforms they're doing, all the activities they're doing. We are interviewing today Utah Approves, and the representative, his name is Nate. So welcome to the podcast, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew.
We are glad to have you. If we could get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Nate Allen. I'm the executive director of Utah Approves. I started getting involved with political work a few years ago. I was working as a volunteer for a presidential campaign in 2020. A candidate that I was really excited for, kind of first guy that I'd ever seen that I actually liked in politics. Actually flew out to Iowa to knock doors for him.
Wow.
And the number one thing that I actually heard when I was knocking doors was, I really like this candidate, but I don't think he can win. And that, sparked something in me. I started to wonder, well, why wouldn't people vote for the candidate? People who don't have high favorability ratings, but have this viability or the sense of viability to keep winning. So I started to look into election reform policies and started my organization towards the end of 2020, actually. So we're, going on, what would that be, 4 years now? So, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's good. Sounds like you've been doing a lot since the organization started.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been really busy here in Utah, but I've also worked a little bit nationally. I'm just trying to advocate for approval voting. Here in Utah, we've, gained the support of the county clerks in the state. We've been working with the legislature and giving presentations to city council. So really busy and just trying to, provide a way that we can actually get those candidates that we really like elected.
Great. Did I read correctly that you have two organizations, one a 50C3 and one a 50C4?
Yeah, that's correct. So we have our 501c4 was Utah Approves. That was our original organization. We formed that so we could start working on lobbying and political action. But we recently, probably about a year ago, formed our 501c3 so we could do more educational work in the space and kind of separate the activities of the two organizations.
Oh, wow. That's ambitious. That's a good thing to do. So the 501, for our audience that doesn't know, 501c4 is a political organization. That's where they're listed through IRS, and they're not tax exempt. But a 501c3 is not a political organization. They're an advocacy group, and they are tax exempt, like the famous 501c3.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, that's been really beneficial for us, obviously, so we can, because most of our activities are education-based, that gives us the ability to fundraise a little bit easier and give those people who donate to us that tax-exempt status on their donations.
Great. So we've talked about approval of voting before on this podcast. It was a long time ago. So if you could please tell us how you define approval voting for our audience, they'd appreciate it.
Yeah, great question. So simply put, approval voting lets voters say yes or no to each candidate on their ballot rather than yes to only one. So you can imagine filling in the bubble as a yes and not filling in the bubble as a no. The way that we choose the winners, whoever has the most yes votes ultimately wins. So it's a simple addition, just like our current system. But the main difference is to the instruction line on the ballot. So rather than vote for one, we write choose as many candidates as you approve or something along those lines. So it's a really simple change, but we gain massive improvements in actually choosing the people who are most representative of the population and reflect the population's values the best.
Okay, that sounds good. And where has approval voting been used in the past? What organizations or what entities have used it before?
Yeah, so in the U.S., there are two cities that are using approval voting right now. The first one to pass it was Fargo, North Dakota.
Wow.
They've used it for 2 election cycles so far. And then the second one to pass it was St. Louis, Missouri, and they've also just recently used it for their second election cycle. Both places have seen really good results. People say that they want to use the system again. They felt like it made it more positive, felt like it was easy to understand and improve the election process overall. So that's really exciting for us. But approval voting does have a long history. It used to be used to elect the Pope in the papal conclaves. It was used in the ancient Greek legislature. It was used in Venice, Italy for a long time, and it's still currently used to elect the UN General Secretary. So it's a tried and tested method, and we're just trying to bring it to the U.S. now.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that. So you said that they used to use it in the Vatican. So did they stop using it? What caused them to stop using it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the exact history of that. But, what I do know is that they just used it as a simple method to try to elect the Pope. And, they may actually, I might have my wires crossed here, they may actually still use that in the papal conclaves. I know they don't use it in the ancient Greek legislature anymore, though.
Oh yes, yeah, you're right. Well, that's interesting. So it sounds like it has been successful in some places, so that's good to know. Now, what do you think is the best strategy for implementing it? We've had election reform people who have various strategies for implementing it. Some want to go to the cities and do it that way. Some want to get it approved by the states. Some want to do referendums, initiatives. What is your best strategy for implementing this?
Yeah, well, I really think that depends on where you are and, the climate of your locality. So, some places do have laws that allow you to pass things on an individual city level and allow the cities to choose what their election methodologies are. Other states, like here in Utah, the legislature has to approve a method before any city can do that. So here we're not going on the city-by-city basis as far as passing it. And, the other two routes would be going to a statewide ballot initiative, and some states have those, some don't. But right now, what we're doing is working through the legislative path, and we feel like that's the best path here in Utah. First, because ballot initiatives are just very expensive, and it's a big risk to try to gain all that money and spend all that time and have to put that on the ballot. But we feel like we actually have a viable path through the legislature, which gives us confidence that we can work with our legislature rather than having to go around them with a ballot initiative. And so there's several legislators in the House and the Senate here who have been favorable to approval voting. We've had a few bills introduced so far, and we're just kind of working on gaining that support and awareness right now in the legislature. So, we're going that path, but like I said, there's lots of other paths that people can take. But one of the things that we've seen a lot of traction with is by getting the county clerks on board. I mentioned earlier, we have all 29 county clerks in the state who have said that they have no issue with approval voting, and they see it as the best alternative option. So getting those election administrators on board is a big deal. And then we have been going city by city, doing presentations on approval voting just to get them to write letters to the legislature saying, hey, we would like to see this offered as an option. And so far, just this year, we've had 5 cities write a letter to the legislature, which has been a really big deal, and we're hoping to use all of that stuff that I just talked about in this next general session to try to get either a pilot program or just open the door for cities to use approval voting if they'd like to.
Okay. So since your organization started 4 years ago, did you have any connections with the legislators beforehand? I'm wondering how an organization goes about getting in the door. How do you get your foot in the door with the legislators?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you might say that I was really ambitious. I had no political experience before I decided to just dive headfirst and start this work because I believe it's what we really needed. But, having this organization and doing the outreach to legislators, doing the outreach to other organizations in the state has really gained us traction and recognition in the state. We're a part of multiple coalitions that exist of 501c4s and C3s and other election reform organizations. There was already a legislator who was aware of approval voting that we were able to make a connection with and have him write our first bill that we had on approval voting here in the state. And then one of our county clerks here in the state, Ricky Hatch, he's a Weber County clerk and used to be the president of the County Clerks Association, had already done some independent research into voting methods. So, we had some luck there with people already knowing what approval voting was and being interested in the fact that it seemed like a very simple method to procedurally administer. So that gave us a lot of headway, and by making those connections and getting that first bill in the door, that kind of gave us the recognition that we were doing real work, and we've just kind of continued on that and piled on top of that with our work.
Okay. So with approval voting, inevitably people are going to say things that is not a good idea, and there's bad reasons to use it. So what are some objections that people have raised against it, and how would you overcome these objections?
Yeah, so, I think the biggest thing that I hear is the concern of what we call bullet voting. So the idea of bullet voting is that people would still just choose one person on their ballot because they don't want to give the chance of somebody else winning the election when they truly have a favorite. And my response to that, there's kind of two things that I like to say. One of them is if you really only like one person on your ballot, then you should only pick that one person on your ballot. There's really no issue in choosing your favorite. The benefit of approval voting is where you draw your line of support. So there might be two candidates on your ballot that you like, and it gives you the freedom to do that. But the other approach I take to that is kind of the political approach, where you can imagine a race. Let's just say that RFK Jr. was still in the race right now. You can imagine a race where some people really like RFK Jr. as their favorite, and maybe Donald Trump is their second favorite, and they really don't like Kamala Harris, or maybe it's the other way around. If that's the case, then you can freely choose RFK Jr. on your ballot, but it's going to be in your best political interest to also choose someone who's a front runner in the polls. So you might choose your other favorite as well. But if the tables are turned on that, and you do like RFK Jr., but your favorite really is Donald Trump, based on the polling, you know that voting for RFK Jr. Isn't really going to make much of a difference if your favorite is Donald Trump. So in that case, you might just pick Donald Trump. So what approval voting does is really gives you the freedom to read the room and understand where things stand. You can choose your favorite if that's a third-party candidate and make sure that they get your support while still being safe and hedging your bets and choosing the candidate who is a front runner in the polls. But if it's the other way around and you just want to pick the front runner, that's totally okay too. So that freedom is my response to people's concerns on bullet voting. So I would say that's the biggest thing that I hear. But, there are some other in the weeds concerns that I hear on approval voting, and I'm happy to address any of those if you're curious.
Yes, I'm curious. What are the in the weeds concerns?
Sure, yeah. So, some things that I hear people say is that a new voting method would be disadvantageous to people who don't have the time and ability to learn about the switch in voting methodology. Usually that's going to favor people who have higher wealth, which means that they often have more time to learn about these kinds of things. And so it's going to be worse for impoverished areas. We've heard this about, various methodologies, and my number one response to that concern is that because approval voting, compared to a lot of other alternative methods, is such a simple change, we've actually seen a lot less money have to be spent on voter education in these other places that have used it in the U.S. Than some of these other methodologies. And again, when we get those exit polls of people saying how they feel about the method, one of the number one things that we hear, I think it's like 70% and above, people are saying positively that they felt like it was an easy method to use. So I don't think that is as big of a concern with approval voting. I would say that those are the two biggest concerns that I hear. That one's a little bit more in the weeds and kind of gets into social science a little bit, but I don't think that that is much of a concern either.
Well, that's good. That's good. One thing I've heard about in regards to these voting reforms is some people talk about the issue of software. For approval voting, would you have to change software? Sounds like the county clerks are on board, so they might not see any problem with it. Is that correct? You wouldn't have to change any software?
Yeah, that is correct. And that's one of the biggest things we like to talk about here in Utah. Being in a conservative state that also really takes pride in the way that we run elections. One of the things that we're really proud of here in Utah is that we've had mail-in voting for longer than almost any other state. I think we're the second place to use mail-in voting. So we're always looking for ways to improve our election processes. And the fact that the county clerks are on board with approval voting shows that this could be the next step in that. And one of the biggest reasons that they're on board with that is because we wouldn't need new software or new voting machines. The software that we've been using in voting machines are already compatible with approval voting. And the biggest reason for that is we're already familiar with a form of approval voting in city council races where you can vote for up to 2 or up to 3 people.
Okay.
So there's nothing prohibiting the ability for someone to fill in multiple bubbles in the machine to be able to read that. What they have to do in that software is just select that max number of 2 or 3 seats for how many people are to be elected. What we would do with approval voting is just change that to how many people are in the race. So, people could choose everyone on their ballot if they wanted to. Because the software already has the ability to do that, it's not an issue. Now, obviously, nobody is going to choose everyone on their ballot because, everyone would intuitively understand that that would basically be the same as not voting at all. But the fact that the software has that capability means that it's actually a big source of cost savings. If we're trying to improve our election processes, we don't have to spend money on those new machines and new voting softwares. The other big advantage for that is that we can keep the way that our elections are run the exact same. So there's a thing that we like to talk about called precinct summability. And all that means is that we're able to tabulate the votes in the individual locations in which they're cast. There are some other voting methodologies where you would either have to electronically transmit raw ballot data to a central location to compile and tally votes in a central location, or you would have to truck paper ballots to a central counting location. And what that does is just creates a single weak point for security. And, we trust our election processes here in Utah, and if we had to go that route, we trust that they would do that well. But that public perception of a single weak point of security is a really big deal, and especially in today's times when we have a lot of people who are concerned about election fraud. So being able to just say that we have a method that can be counted in the exact way that we've done it for a really long time, that we can count them in individual locations, and then just transmit the vote totals to that reporting location like we already do, creates a sense of security and safety for people with their election processes.
Okay. So earlier you're talking about how one of the main functions of your organization is to educate the population about election reform. How do you go about doing this? Do you do it by social media? Do you have seminars in person? How do you do this?
Yeah, great question. So, we try to take an all of the above approach. So, one of the biggest ways is by going to conferences and participating in panels. We try to find any of those that we can and talk to as many people as show up as possible. But we also like to do community tabling events at farmers markets or college campuses and just talk to people as they pass by about the policy, what we're trying to do, and ask for volunteers to join us. But yeah, we also participate in, social media and try to put out, funny memes and stuff like that to get people who might be concerned about politics but aren't already aware of election methodology, as that is kind of we feel like election nerds sometimes being into this kind of stuff, but it is very relevant, so we're trying to bring in that larger population. We also have an email list, and we try to do as many community events and basically everything that we can to educate the population.
All right. So you mentioned conferences. What are some of the conferences to attend?
Yeah, so most recently we attended one here in Utah called the Utah Donor Collaborative Democracy Conference. Something that we do annually here, and we were invited just to speak on a panel of election methodologies. There is a representative from the Utah Ranked Choice Voting organization there. We also have an open primaries organization here called People for Utah. And us three were just on the panel talking about, what's the next steps in Utah? How are our organizations doing? What do we think our chances are for passing these policies in the near future? Stuff like that. So we had a pretty good sized audience for that panel. That was the biggest one most recently. We've also done a Hinckley Institute of Politics Forum. That's the political department at the University of Utah. So we've done a big talk there, the comparisons between ranked choice voting and approval voting. But we're just kind of looking for anything that comes up. We've been invited to I did speak at the Independent National Convention last year as well. Did a panel on election methodologies, and that was a more national approach, but, just trying to spread the word as much as possible and get interest in what we're trying to do.
It's called Independent National Convention?
Yeah, that's correct.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a newer organization. They just did their first one last year, but they just had their last convention, I think it was in September.
Okay. So they are an organization for independent voters?
Yeah, so I think what they're trying to do is create unity between all independent voters and third-party voters in the country. Independents are kind of broad swath of people, and so what they're trying to do is just create a central place where everyone can convene and talk about why they're independents and what the movement is supposed to look like compared to the two major parties that we've had for such a long time.
Oh, wow, that sounds great. So you said that there's another organization called Utah for Open Primaries?
They're called People for Utah, but yeah, they advocate for open primaries here in the state.
Okay, great. All right, and you're talking about right now, when I talked to you earlier, you kindly said that you were willing to do this interview even though it was in the middle of the election season, and we're recording this in late October. So there's not much time left in the election. So when the elections is going strong, what are some of the things that, if it's not top secret, that you're doing during the middle of the election campaign?
Yeah, good question. So I actually just started a new job at a organization called GoodParty.org. You may have heard of them. They they help independent candidates run for office with a tool set and with support for independent candidates to try to kind of level the playing field between the major two parties. But I'm not in a position to speak too much to that organization. I don't have like press approval or anything like that, but that is kind of what I'm doing as my other position. But yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. So Nate, how can our audience support Utah Approves?
Yeah, so there's two things that we really need right now. As most political organizations, we really need donations. One of the biggest things that we're trying to keep employees on board to try to do, the types of things that we need, like social media, continuing to do lobbying efforts. Lobbying is a really, really big deal when you're trying to do this stuff because all of these special interest groups have their own lobbyists, and we need to be able to level the playing field for the people by hiring our own. But the other thing is, like I mentioned, we're going around to cities across the state right now. So if you have any listeners that are in Utah, please reach out to your city councilors and ask them if they would be interested in having a presentation on approval voting. We've attempted to do outreach to a lot of cities, but there's nothing that compares to a citizen in their city reaching out to them asking to hear about that voting method. So please reach out and you can CC us or reach out ahead of time. We even have a workshop on our website that shows you how to write such an email. So check out our website at utahapproves.org, and you can kind of learn how to write an email like that to reach out, and then hopefully we can schedule a presentation, and we would love to do that to bring approval voting to your city.
Okay, so you said the main ways to help you is through donation, and how else is a good way to help you?
So donation and reach out to your city council members to ask for a presentation on approval voting.
All right, sounds good. Sounds great. So Nate, we thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your organization. It sounds like you're doing some good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me. I'm looking forward to hearing this when it comes out.
All right. Well, we wish you all the best. Utah Approves, and we also wish you the best in everything you do in your personal and professional life.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Bye now.